Good afternoon and welcome to the Bureau of Business Research webinar on assessing retail capture in Nebraska. This is the last webinar of the current school year. We'll be back in the fall with another webinar series and hope that you'll join us then. My name is Eric Thompson. I'll be presenting this. I'm the director of the Bureau of Business Research, and I'll be presenting this webinar with Spencer Cook, who is an undergraduate Bureau of Business Research scholar here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. A few things to mention before we get started with our PowerPoint presentation. The first is we've provided a chat room, so if you wish to chat with some of the other webinar participants during the question and answer period or even while the webinar is going on, please feel free to do so. We also have a question and answer window. Spencer and I will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. However, you can enter a question at any time. So some people like to enter the questions right when it occurs to them. Some people prefer to wait till the end of the webinar and type in their question then. So whatever you prefer is just fine. So with those points made, Spencer and I are going to go ahead and get started with our webinar on retail capture. By way of an outline, there's some important definitions we should provide before we get started. Talk a little bit about the motivation. Why are we studying retail capture? Looking at the specific measure we're using of retail capture, which is called a pull factor. And also looking at some research that Spencer did, looking at some of the basic determinants of retail capture. And then finally, what are some of the implications of this research? So the Bureau of Business Research is engaged in a broader effort to study retail capture here in Nebraska, and Spencer's research was the first effort in that broader study. So what do we mean by retail capture? Well, one important thing to say is that, and this is why retail has been in quotes so far in the PowerPoint slides that you've seen, is that we're actually talking about something a little broader than retail. It's really all consumer-oriented businesses, so obviously that includes retail businesses, but it also includes leisure and hospitality businesses, most notably restaurants, hotels, but obviously there's leisure and hospitality businesses like bowling alleys and amusement parks, and you can think of all sorts of other recreational type businesses. And finally, there's personal services. That can include haircuts and things like that, but also include repairing vehicles, things of that nature. So when we say retail capture, we're really talking about the broader group of consumer-oriented business services. Now, not perfectly, but these retail and consumer-oriented activities can be approximated or approximately captured by using Nebraska taxable sales. Now, we know there's some personal services that aren't taxed. We know that taxable sales does include some sales to businesses and things like construction materials, but a significant part of taxable sales, as measured by the Nebraska Department of Revenue, is activity in these consumer-oriented retail, leisure and hospitality, and personal service businesses. Now, we also look at taxable sales in 2017, so that's a few years ago. Why 2017? Well, first of all, this is, again, the first study in our broader study of retail capture in Nebraska. We wanted to focus on a year prior to the expanded collection of taxes on online sales in Nebraska. So some online sales were not generally taxed, not included in taxable sales until relatively recently. And so we wanted to develop kind of a baseline estimate in the period before. Looking forward, we want to see how expanding the collection of online sales might have influenced retail capture here in Nebraska in a subsequent study. But we're starting by looking in the prior period. There's another big advantage. It may be useful as we expand our research to bring in similar counties, but in other states beyond Nebraska, counties in Kansas, South Dakota, Iowa, Colorado, and so forth, further afield in the Midwest. Now, if we do that, it becomes very tricky to use taxable sales because every state has its own taxable sales laws and what's covered and what isn't, and so forth. And so for the year 2017, we can go with what's known as the economic census that occurs every 5 years, most recently 2017. It takes a long time for the data to be finished. So 2022, next year, they're going to do another one, but we won't see that data till 2025 or so. So the best opportunity for us to potentially broaden the study would be to use the 2017 economic census, and that is detailed sales in all the different counties and cities by detailed industry. So we wanted to be able to continue. That's the other reason for focusing on 2017. Now, what is retail capture? Retail capture is the share of expected taxable sales in a county. So what would you expect to gather given the county's population? It's the share that's actually gathered. So if a retail capture is 0.8, that means for every dollar you would expect to have in taxable sales given your population, you gather 80 cents in actual taxable sales. Presumably the remaining retail activities is occurring in other counties or other places in the state. As indicated, expected taxable sales is calculated based on the county population. So we compare actual county taxable sales with expected taxable sales. And of course, that population data comes from the U.S. Bureau of Census. Okay, now why are we doing this? What's the reason for this effort to focus on retail capture? Well, I see at least 3 reasons. First of all, retail employment is important for county economies. For a lot of workers, full-time and even part-time retail work is just what they're looking for and is a good match for their interests or the time they have or the skill set they've been able to develop. So it's very important for the economy and for economic development to have those opportunities locally. Obviously, retail activity and leisure and hospitality and personal services also generate a lot of local sales tax revenue, which is beneficial for providing public services. And then lastly, and perhaps this is just as important as the other 2, there's a quality of life component to having more retail activity, more restaurants, more leisure and hospitality businesses in your local community versus having to drive 20, 30 miles to another town nearby. It makes life more interesting, makes life more pleasant. Make sure that you have businesses that reflect the tastes of people in your community rather than the tastes of people in a community 20 miles away. So it's very important for quality of life, which is important for quality of life, for making people enjoy their lives more. And then also has an economic development component beyond that, which is relating to population growth. The more interesting communities we have in the state, the better chance that Nebraska communities throughout the state, not just Lincoln and Omaha, have to retain and attract population growth. So those are our reasons for studying retail capture. Now, retail capture certainly can vary by location. I'm sure you've all observed this. So some cities seem to have a whole lot of retail activity, a whole lot of restaurants and leisure activity, and it's partly because they have more population, but sometimes it seems like they have more than you would expect just given their population. Other counties and cities, it seems way less than you would expect given their population. So retail capture certainly varies by location. What's the reason for this? Well, most basically, there's certain types of retail and service businesses that require a larger market in order to operate profitably. So you're not going to get a cheesecake factory in a small town. There's some types of restaurants and chains that want to operate in larger cities. And you can think of plenty of examples in the retail space like that as well. So that's part of it. Bigger places can just capture more types of activity because they have the local market. Secondly, and we think just as importantly, businesses have an incentive to locate near what we're calling the median customer. In other words, you don't want to be far away from the majority of your customers. You want to be close to as many of them as possible. Well, that gives you a powerful incentive to locate in the largest town in the market, not just anywhere, but in that largest town. You'll be closer to the median customer in most cases, to more of your customers in all cases. And so we see these retail trade centers develop. And it's not just retail businesses, it's also things like restaurant, leisure and hospitality that tend to pop up as well. So the bottom line is retail flocks to larger places, both in absolute terms, places with more population, and in relative terms to the particular part of the state. You'll see retail and the related businesses flocking to especially to the largest place, according to economic theory. Now, how do you test this hypothesis? How do you measure retail capture to start with? Well, that's through a concept called a pull factor, and this is where Spencer's research comes in. I'm going to have Spencer explain the pull factor definition and tell you a little bit about his research.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. So pull factors are measured by dividing the county per capita taxable retail sales by the state average per capita taxable retail sales. So a pull factor of 1 would mean that the county has the same per capita taxable retail sales as the state as a whole. Less than 1 would mean that it has less per capita taxable retail sales, and more than 1 would mean that it has more per capita taxable retail sales. This map shows Nebraska counties highlighted by pull factor. So the darker orange counties have a higher pull factor, and the darker green counties have a lower pull factor. Then the more pale counties have a pull factor closer to 1. You can see that the counties up near Omaha and down in Lincoln, and as well as along the route of I-80, are a little bit more orange than the rest of the counties, showing that they draw more retail capture. These are the 5 counties with the highest pull factors in Nebraska. That would be Hall County, Madison County, Buffalo County, Red Willow County, and Dodge County. And this table shows that we group some of the counties by population ranges. And in those population ranges, we found the average pull factors. And in addition to that, the table shows some notable outliers. So for example, Cass County has a pull factor of 0.35, while the average for that population range would be 1.01. And an explanation for this could be that while Cass County is the 12th largest county in Nebraska and relatively large for Nebraska, it's located between Douglas and Lancaster counties, the number 1 and 2 most populated counties in Nebraska. So for its area, it's relatively small. So the previous table suggests that pull factors may rise with both absolute and relative population, but is there a statistical relationship? To test this, we ran a regression of pull factors on absolute and relative population. For relative population, we use the term trade center, or a county with the largest population of all adjacent counties, which would explain Cass County being smaller. The regression was an intercept plus beta 1 times natural log of the population times beta 2 times trade center, 0 if no, 1 if yes, plus a residual. Both population and trade center were found to be statistically significant and positively correlated with retail capture. This table shows the regression results, and it shows that the natural log of the population had a coefficient of 0.108 and a p-value of less than 0.05, and trade center had a coefficient of 0.387 and a p-value also less than 0.05, showing that both of these are, again, statistically significant and positively correlated. The trade center having a coefficient of 0.387 shows that a trade center would be, a county that is a trade center would be expected to have a pull factor 0.387 larger than a county that is not a trade center. And I'll hand it back to Dr. Thompson.
Spencer was able to show through his research that pull factors, which is our measure of retail capture, is positively related to both absolute and relative population. But Spencer and I both know that obviously there's other factors that influence the level of retail activity in a county, and are things that counties are able to control, whether they're a small, large, or medium-sized county, and whether they're located near Lancaster and Douglas County or not. So in future iterations of this research, as we expand it out, we're going to look for the other key variables now that we've controlled for absolute and relative population. So what might some of those be? Going to the second thing on my list first would be tourism. So we built our expected retail activity, our estimate of that based on the county population. So obviously a county that has that is more focused on tourism is going to get a lot of spending far beyond what you'd expect just given the local population. And so one thing we need to figure in is identifying which of the Nebraska counties are really the tourism centers and building that into our model of retail capture. Obviously, entrepreneurship is a key thing. We were very deterministic in our first effort at the research, showing how retail activity was determined by population, something that's somewhat out of a county's control, at least for the short term. But obviously, the local entrepreneurs have a lot to say about how successful a county will be in terms of retail capture, whether we're talking about retail activity literally, or restaurants, lodging, or other leisure activities, or personal services. So very strong entrepreneurs, even in a smaller town, can create a terrific restaurant or a really interesting store that'll draw people over from the nearby big town. And so there's the level of entrepreneurship in a place is going to show up in a lot of places, including the pull factor that you see in a county. Obviously, per capita income might matter. There is variation in Nebraska of per capita income. So it could be, if we account for per capita income, that will enhance our model. That doesn't always happen with retail capture, but it's worth investigating. Another thing, for those, I think there is variation county to county within Nebraska in local sales tax rates. But I think the bigger difference would be for the border counties of Nebraska, depending on whether they're adjacent to a state with lower or higher overall state and local sales taxes, or what the rules are in the state in terms of things that are covered and not covered by the sales tax, could also have a big effect on retail sales capture. So we need to build that into our modeling. And then there's probably other factors that have not occurred to us yet that we'll need to look at in the future. I actually was hoping to get some advice from the participants during the question and answer period if they had any thoughts on that. We're just starting this research initiative. We got a lot to learn and looking for advice. I mentioned the question and answer period. It is upon us. Thank you for participating in our webinar today and considering these important industries for Nebraska. I seem to have a question. It's a little small, but I'm going to lean forward here and see that for the trade center regression analysis, what was your data? Was it limited to Nebraska? So yes, we studied only I believe it's 80, correct me if I'm wrong, Spencer, the 88 Nebraska counties where sales tax is collected. There are a few smaller counties that don't collect sales tax. We did also, our definition was the largest, a trade center was the largest county in its region. In other words, all adjacent counties had a smaller population. And I believe we also looked at counties in neighboring states in making that finding that a county met our qualifications as a trade center. But our analysis was limited at this point to the 88 Nebraska counties. There don't seem to be any other questions at this time. We thought it would be fun to show you the poster that Spencer developed for the University of Nebraska Undergraduate Research Fair, which I believe was called Research Days this year as it was online. But I don't know if Spencer needs to go over the whole study again, but if you could just explain to the participants what the research fair is about and what all you and the other students did, that would be great. And that may give people a few more minutes to type in a question as well, if they want.
Yeah, this is the poster that I used. The research days was a opportunity for student researchers to share their research. And so I did mine on the retail capture throughout Nebraska. And again, we used kind of the variables of absolute population and relative population, which we defined as natural log the population for absolute. And the reason we did that is that the population ranges so much that the graph would have been, or the numbers would have been really messy if we had used total population. And Trade Center was just 0, 1. And as Dr. Thompson said, it's a 1 if the county is the largest of all adjacent counties.
Okay, thank you, Spencer. And so, well, I think we did have one more question. Do you expect the research to provide the unicameral with a stronger revenue forecast? Well, I suppose it would, in the sense of if you think about some of those border regions where we're determining which county gets the retail sales. In the border counties, you're determining, when you determine that, you're also determining, does Nebraska get the retail sales? So I would say this is more basic research. Whether what we find, if applied to the border counties, would have a value for state revenue forecasts, that application issue, I think, would need to be determined at a later date. I confess that's not the primary purpose for our research, but that is a potential use. I should add it to my list of 3 that I showed at the beginning. How are internet sales captured? Were they captured based on county of residence? If the purchase, well, that of course we were looking at in the period where a significant share of the online sales, a smaller share was being captured. More of it was going untaxed at that time. Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things, I think, from online shopping is the potential for smaller counties to capture more of the retail sales if that retail sales gets attributed to the address that it was delivered to. Good questions. Not seeing any more questions. I guess we'll call the webinar to the end. Thank you for participating in this webinar and any others during the school year, and we look forward to being back in the fall.